Hello, everybody, and welcome to Find My Past from Home, where we discuss all things genealogy and family history. History is the topic all the time, right? We love it. So for those of you joining us, maybe for the first time, welcome. We're really happy to have you with us. For those of you who have come back week after week after week, thank you so much for participating, for being a part of our community, for engaging with us in conversation and with each other. We think it's absolutely amazing. And we're always so happy to be a part of your week. My name is Jen Baldwin. I am the North American Content Acquisition Manager, which basically means I get to play with some really cool historical records and try and make them available to those of you who use Find My Past. Joining me in the comments today is Niall Cullen. Everybody say hello to Niall. He's not on camera, obviously, but he'll be helping with comments and questions and links and all sorts of things. So thank you very much, Niall, for being with us today. It's always good to have those people kind of sitting in the background, knowing that they've got your back. All right, we love it. All right, several of you are already chiming in. Thanks so much. Sally's here from Oxfordshire, where it's sunny, so that's good to hear. Wendy in Somerset, thank you, Daphne, for chiming in. As always, Ian's with us from North Wales. Guy says a surprising sunny Essex. Ellen's in Roscoe, Illinois. That's great. Thank you, Ellen. Karen's in North London. Linda, you're with us over on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's see. Heather's up in Scotland. Linda is in a changeable Northern Ireland, right? Never sit still, right? Janine in Denver. Hello, Janine. It's great to have you with us. Jane is with us as well. Jane Richards. Andrew's here from Lancashire. So a lot of our regulars. It's always really good to see you guys. Thank you for joining us and thank you for tuning in every week. We so appreciate you. And today we are going to talk about North American records and North American genealogy. So today is a live Q&A session. You can ask me anything you want about the United States or Canada research. I will do my best to answer. And if I don't know the answer, I should at least be able to point you in the right direction. So throw your questions in the comments. We did have a few in advance that I'll start with. But if you have questions, anything at all, about North American research, feel free to put them in the comments and let us know what you're thinking about. Even if it's something that you just kind of heard and maybe you're curious if it's really true. Maybe you're not actively working on anything in your research in North America, but anything at all, right? So I will do my best to answer all of those questions. All right, Robert's with us from Vancouver Island in British Columbia, one of my favorite places, actually. Christine is in Manchester. It's always good to see you. Let's see, Dennis is in Durham. Barbara's in Illinois as well, in Rockford. So a good group today. The other piece of this, of course, is that if you know something interesting about one of these questions that gets asked, feel free to put it in the comments and engage in that conversation, right? Share links, share your knowledge. We're not obviously all experts at everything. No one can know everything. So it's important that we have a discussion, not just me talking about things, right? Let's discuss. All right, so we're going to start with a couple of the questions that we got in advance. And I did not get these into the system just yet, so I'm going to read them out loud. It's probably the best way to do this. So let me just get myself set up here, you guys. Okay, so we're going to start with a pretty basic question. And the reason we're going to start here actually is because, well, it's not all basic. We're going to start here because it really shows the difference between North American, especially United States research and UK research. And there are some really significant differences. And that's one of the things that you need to know kind of walking into the US is the way the records are organized and the way the government works obviously is quite different, right? We fought a whole war to be able to make those things different. So Miriam asked, how do I get a copy of a marriage, parish or civil, from Clinton, Iowa? She has Michael Redden and Bridget Redden married in 1865, according to the transcription. And it says that they were Catholic. and she's Googled, but is having no joy with the search whatsoever. Miriam is in Australia. So how do we do this long distance approach to something as straightforward as a marriage record? Right. So one of the first things that you have to know about the United States is that there is no national system. The only national collection we really have in the US is the census collection. There are others, of course, and there are plenty of records created by the federal government. But when it comes to vital registration, every state is different. Every state manages themselves in a different way. And inside each of those states, every county could be different. So there was no civil registration. There was no standard across the board, across the country. And even the start dates of record keeping is inconsistent, and it varies from state to state and even from county to county in some cases. So, and Leslie just asked, is there an easy way to find BMDs from various states? And the answer is every state is different, right? It's absolutely unique in every instance. So while in the UK or in Australia, you might have a civil registration process, or in Scotland, you might have a civil registration, or you might have a really consistent religious record set. We don't have those here, right? There's a very significant difference in the United States where there is no national system and there is no state church, right? There's no one unified church across the whole country. So is there an easy way to find BMDs? Is there an easy way to get a marriage record out of this particular location in Iowa that Miriam asked about? And the answer is, well, no, not really. There's no one standard database. You have to go into each individual state and each individual county to be able to access that information. So back to Miriam's question. She asked, how do I get a marriage record from Clinton, Iowa? Well, there's a couple of things right off the bat that you need to do, Miriam. And the first thing, sounds like you might have already done a bit. I did look at this morning. You need to understand that the county holds these records in most instances. In the case of Clinton, Iowa, it's a town. It's also a county. So when you're looking online for resources, whether you're looking for a specific town or city location or a county or state, understand that if you're on the website for Clinton, Iowa, you may be on the town's website, but you may be on the county website. So make sure that you know exactly where you are on the internet, because it's easy, actually, I would say it's easy to confuse a town with a county in these instances. Now, for those of you who are looking for things like Johnson County, or what's another common one, Hamilton County, you have to make sure you know that you're in the right state. Not every county website actually says, hey, this is Illinois, this is Nebraska, this is Missouri. So really read thoroughly when you're doing your search and make sure that you're actually looking at the right place, whether it's a city or a county or a state, to identify the records that you need. The second thing then, once you're in the right website, which sounds obvious, but sometimes is a little bit more difficult than it should be, right? Then you can go into whatever section they have for their records. Now, typically it's referred to as a county clerk or a county recorder. Those are almost always the labels kind of given to the office that holds the records. So in the case of Clinton County, Iowa, I did go to their website this morning. And they have an indication that they say that death and marriage certificates are available statewide through the recorder's office, but only back to 1954. For anything more historical, they use a site called Vital Records Check, which is operated across the US. I know there's a couple, at least genealogy sites that have links to them. And they send you in through the system and you have to pay for a record and have it sent to you. And a lot of states and a lot of counties are using this system as kind of their go-to resource. It's not a fraud. It really is a vital records system, but it's not maintained or controlled by any government agency. It's a private entity as far as I'm aware. So I would say exhaust all other resources first before you use Vital Records Check. You're going to come across Vital Records Check often in US research. So the one place, obviously, that we need to check first and foremost for any marriage record in the United States is the U.S. Marriages collection on Findmypast. We just happen to have the largest collection of marriages online. So I did a check for Michael Redden and Bridget Redden, and all we have on Findmypast is the transcription. But that transcription was given to us by Family Search. So if you recreate the search on the Family Search website, which you should always do, go to the source and try to find what you're looking for, you actually find the record. And I'm going to do my best to pull this up here. So I went to Family Search. Let me see if I can share my screen. And was able to find the marriage in question, right? So there we go. Okay, so we're on Family Search, and the Reddens are actually right here in the middle. Hopefully you guys can see that. So Matthew and Bridget here, right? And we've got their dates and everything that we know about them. And here in the corner, you can read that it says Catholic priest. So that, I'm guessing, is where Miriam got her information that, and is making the assumption that they were indeed Catholic. Now, for the county, right, for this particular location, this is probably all that exists. Now, some counties and some states did actually document full certificates, but in this instance, because this is all that's available, at least at a quick glance, this register type entry may be as close as you're going to get to a marriage certificate. How, at least online, right, and available today. What we do know, though, is that they were likely married in a Catholic ceremony. So when you go to learn more about that, you see that that part of Iowa is part of the Diocese of Davenport. The Diocese of Davenport does have an archive website, and you can make a request for copies of sacramental records, which of course would include baptism and marriages. So Miriam, the answer to your question, in all honesty, is go to the Diocese of Davenport archives, fill out their form, and see what you get back. If they have that form online, generally speaking, they have some kind of policy and procedure in place to handle genealogical requests. Not every Catholic archive does, but it looks like the Diocese of Davenport has a pretty well figured out system. So Miriam, your answer is straightforward and convoluted at the same time, right? It is, how do I get a copy of a marriage, parish or civil, from a particular location? The answer is not straightforward, but once you get used to the idea of looking at the state and county level, it becomes a lot easier to find and access those materials. Now, one of the areas in which I always go to when I'm in a new area of the country is the Family Search Wiki. So if you need information on a specific place like Clinton County, Iowa, that you've never researched in before, first thing is to go to the Family Search Wiki and read the material that's available to see what the lay of the land is, right? To understand what records exist, what doesn't exist, when they started record keeping, and for which type of BMD, which category of information. Okay, so I'm going to go back into comments for just a second. Let's see. So Marilyn commented, if you want a sacramental record, and that's sufficient, contact the diocesan archives. So archives. So we got there together. She just got there faster than me because I wanted to walk through the whole process. Robert makes a good comment, and this is true everywhere around the world, but most certainly in the United States. There may be a genealogy society for that state that can assist. Absolutely. There should be a state society. I think all 50 states still do have a state society. There will also probably be a county level society. So go to the county for the organization as well. So in this case, it was Clinton County, Iowa. Google Clinton County, Iowa Genealogical Society. Again, make sure you're at the right Clinton County and work through their records from there. Okay, let's see. And Sylvia says, and that's why I hate looking for records in the US. Every state, town, and county is so different. And yeah, it's maybe more time consuming, Sylvia, but it's also always an adventure, I guess. You just never know what you're gonna find. It's good. It's fun. It's learning, right? So I keep telling myself that I'm not giving up. Really, I'm just learning. Okay, so Sally asked, when did the US Census happen and do they hold the same information as the UK Census? This is a great question, actually. I wish more people asked stuff like this. Okay, so Sally, the US Census started in 1790. It was the kind of immediate reaction almost to the end of the Revolutionary War and the brand new American government saying we need to understand what our population looks like. So they took a very basic head of household census. And the first couple of decades of censuses are actually head of household census. And what that means is that they didn't record every individual name in the family. They would walk up to the front door, they'd knock. John Smith would be the head of household, and he has a wife somewhere between the age of 30 and 37. So she gets a tick mark. And then they have 3 children, and Billy is 10, and Sally is 8, and little John is 4, and they each get a tick mark in the appropriate box next to their age and sex. So the first one started in 1790, and we did a census on every decade after that. So the only one that's missing is the 1890 federal census. Every other decade exists from 1790 all the way through. The 1890 census was destroyed in damage after a fire. There are some fragments of that census that exist, but not the complete record. So the second half of your question is, do they hold the same information as the UK census? Yes and no. In most cases, they record consistent information, names, location, age, or year of birth. In many instances, they record nationality. But certainly the first censuses, 1790 through 1840, are those little head of household with a tick mark. So those take a bit of special understanding and treatment. After that, from 1850 forward, they are a lot more detailed. They list every single individual and their occupations and naturalization status at some point. And of course, just like with the UK census, every year the columns, the questions are a little bit different. So understand what's going into every census, right? I always encourage people to look at the entire page, especially with population censuses. We tend to look at the names and the relationships and probably the ages, and then we kind of stop. In the US Census, you have a number of other columns that follow, and it's really important to look at each of those columns and understand what's being recorded and understand the information that's available. So in some instances, like the 1850 and I think the 1860 as well, there's a question about personal value and value of real estate. So basically, how much money does your ancestor have? And that can be extremely telling, right? If you look at that number and you say, well, they rent their property and they own zero worth of real estate and they only have $100 in assets, right? You know what kind of life they're living. They're on the very low end of that poverty scale. If you look at that record and it says, well, they have $50,000 worth of assets and they own $60,000 worth of property, well, then your research path and your research plan is going to change as a result of the fact that this guy is, he's got a lot of money. And there's got it, wherever there's money, there's records. So you adapt and adjust. The other thing about the US Census that I always find interesting is that there's more to it than just the population schedule. So that's the schedule that we use most often for genealogy purposes, but there's also mortality schedules, agricultural schedules, and for a couple of years, there were also slave schedules. So make sure that you're looking at and understanding all of the different opportunities within the census collection. It's more than just that population collection. The other main difference between the UK and the US on the census is probably the way it was taken. So in more recent years, in terms of the UK census, a form was sent to the household and they filled it out themselves, right? And so in the 1911 census in the UK, you see a lot of, I'm a suffragette and I'm not going to fill out this census because I don't get to vote. In the US, we didn't ever have the opportunity to do those things. There was actually an individual that was hired by the Census Bureau. He would come to your door, the enumerator, and he was the one who actually wrote everything down. So he would talk to whoever answered the door, whichever adult was there, and fill in the information. So the handwriting might be consistent page to page, but it also might be really bad handwriting and really sloppy, especially if he's at the end of his day and he's tired and he's been, on his horse all day or whatever, or going door to door and having all these interactions with other human beings. That is an exhausting job. So So the handwriting struggles as a result of that process. We also don't have one household per page. Because he was going door to door, he would just fill in every line on his sheet, right? So you see household after household after household, and there's no distinction or separation between those units. It's just name after name after name after name. So you have to, again, read all the columns, read all the margins to understand what is a household and what isn't. One last thing about the census, I suppose, is that we have a smaller amount of time we have to wait for each census to be released. So in the United States, we have a 72-year privacy rule versus the UK, where it's 100 years. So while we're all anxiously awaiting a new record set coming soon, maybe, in the UK, in the US, we're anticipating the release of the 1950 US Census, because we release every 72 years. We're now 3 censuses ahead of the UK. So 1940 is currently available on all the major sites. 1950 will be released April 1st of 2022. And unlike the UK, it's not going to go to one particular site. It's public domain material as soon as it's released. So in theory, I could send a request to the National Archives and get a copy of the entire census if I wanted. I don't. That would be a lot of data. But in theory, anybody could do that. It's public domain. So every 72 years. So look forward ahead this coming year, next calendar year, 2022, to the 1950 census being released. It'll be the first time my father is in a census. Okay, so that should answer the census question. Hopefully that covers it. Just looking through all the other comments to make sure. And thanks, Niall, for sharing all those links. Really appreciate that. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was asked ahead of our live stream. I think it's an interesting one. Where did you go? Okay, so when we're on the topic of census, this is actually a great question to follow up with. Bronwyn asked about the possibility of finding her 3 times great-grandfather in New York City. Excellent topic, right? Metropolitan research is delightful. So here's the story. 3rd great-grandfather Samson Bailey and his wife Mary were from County Down in Ireland. They moved to New York in 1844 with 2 children, Robert and Sarah, and they lived in Manhattan, somewhere around 3rd Avenue. Their youngest child was born in 1856. There's no record of Samson after that date. Mary called herself a widow by 1871, but no record has been found of Samson's death. She lived in Manhattan until her death in 1875. Where might I look for information regarding Samson? So this is a fun one to actually approach. So first of all, you're in the middle of a major metropolitan area, arguably one of the largest cities in the world in that period. I didn't look it up, but I'd have to imagine it's up there. So you're looking at a period of high activity in the United States, right? If we're looking for the death of Samson specifically, we know that he's alive in 1856, or at least we can imply that from what she said. And we know that he's deceased by 1871. Well, what's happening in the middle of that period, of course, is the American Civil War. So my first instinct was to say, did he fight in the war? That would be the first question I would ask you, Bronwyn. Have you looked at Civil War records? Because there were a number of Irish heritage-focused units, especially out of the northern states. So it's very likely that as a man of his age, he could have joined one of those units and been lost during the war. How do you know that? How would you find out? Well, there's a couple of resources that are really great. And Findmypast has them, as well as a number of other websites. So you're going to look for Civil War Soldiers and Sailors database. If you Google it, you will actually get led to the National Park Service, who actually created the database in partnership with the Federation of Genealogical Societies some years ago. That platform on the National Park Service website is the most original source you're going to find. So that's the one I almost always tend to lean on. However, the search capabilities on that site are limited. So always double check a site like Findmypast to see if those materials are available and if that index is available, because you can search with variants on names and those kinds of things. She does indicate that Sampson and Bailey, his first and last names, could be spelled in multiple ways. So check all of those databases to see if you can find him fighting in the Civil War. If he did, it's entirely likely that his wife filed for a widow's pension, especially if he's already deceased by 1871. So look for that widow's pension, because if that is the case, if he fought in the war and if she took a pension, that pension file should be incredibly useful. You're going to have to order it from the National Archives. It is going to cost some money, but it is well worth its price. The one I have for I have a few of these, but one I have for my second great grandfather and his spouse. He filed a pension first, and then she took the widow's pension. It's well over 3 inches thick of paper, so it's a gold mine of information. So that would be one of my first things I would look at. Bronwyn, is if he lost his life in the Civil War. Second thing I would do, or maybe not necessarily in that order, but consecutively, I would start to analyze all those census materials. You have a number of census possibilities here. They arrived in 1844, so they should be in the 1850, 1860, and 1870 census. Because the last death is recorded in 1875. You also have the opportunity of looking for state censuses. New York, I think, has an 1865 state census, so you want to make sure you utilize that as well. Try and narrow down what you're looking at, right? You're getting all of this data from these census records, and what you're doing is actually building a shorter and shorter window of when he could have possibly passed away. So make sure that you're kind of keeping your eye on the years so that you can get that window of his possible death to be smaller and smaller. That will help. You can, of course, try to obtain a copy of any kind of death certificate or notice of his death. You would want to look at the New York City Metropolitan Archives for that. And you can find them online. And again, you do have to make a request, and it does cost money to access those materials. Obviously, you want to look at newspapers. And I would really heavily analyze the 1870 federal census. If she is a widow in 1871, was she a widow in 1870? I believe there's a mortality schedule for the 1870 census. So if he died in that year, he will be in that mortality schedule. And then, of course, don't forget any state-specific resources, right? We have materials on Find My Past from the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. I would look there to see if there's any indication as well. So there's a handful of suggestions for you, Bronwyn. I hope you're able to narrow it down, but really start with those censuses, federal and state. Get all the data that you can, extract everything from those census records, look at the American Civil War period to see if that is where he ended up, and then obviously utilize state-specific materials as well. Okay, so let me go back to comments. This is a great one. Tony says, on the census, I once saw the respondent was oldest daughter. I don't recall her age or surname, but oldest daughter has stuck with me for a long time. That's fabulous. Yeah, that's really good. Okay. I'm trying to read and keep up with conversation at the same time. This is a good one. Dennis, I like this one. Are there national coal mining records available? Pennsylvania, anybody? Yeah, so coal mining is a great topic, and this is a perfect segue actually to one of our other questions that we had. So we'll cover both of these at one time. So are there national coal mining records available? No. Right, when we started our discussion today, we said there's really no national collections available in the United States, and that is true for occupation as well. Again, these are, coal mines are private entities, they're private companies in most cases. They are not run by the government, either federal or state. And so any of their records that are available historically are either produced through manuscript collections, or they're donated by the corporation themselves, or they're public domain content. So let's talk about mining. This is one of my favorite topics, actually. How do you research a miner in the United States? There are a number of different avenues to do this. So coal mining in particular, let's start with that. Coal mining in almost all states, was something that was run by a large company or even a medium-sized company and had lots and lots of employees. So for coal miners, you might find databases created on a state level that indicate accidents, for example, or deaths as a result of a mining accident. There are a number of states that have those. So Pennsylvania actually does have a register of that nature, but it's not something that was created in the moment. It's someone going back into the materials, the historic record, and adding to that database today versus adding to it when the accidents actually happened in most cases. The United States Geological Survey, or the USGS, did at one time maintain records on an annual basis of a number of different mining related incidents. And they do have a small database, and there are records available online for the USGS, but they are not comprehensive. And they certainly don't cover every mine in the country. And they certainly don't cover every individual that worked at those mines. So it's a good place to start to understand what might have been happening in the area you're interested in the time frame you're interested in. But you're not going to find any kind of national database that says John Smith died in this mine on this day because of this accident. There are a number of materials available for states that had heavy mining activities, right? Pennsylvania is one of them, obviously. Because of Pennsylvania's connection with the coal industry and their connection with the Irish community, there's going to be a number of materials available for you in newspapers. And you want to look in Pennsylvania newspapers and also in Irish newspapers. Don't forget to look across the pond in these kinds of contextual materials. The reason for that is because, Patrick may have immigrated to Pennsylvania to work in the coal mines, but the rest of his family stayed home, or grandma's still at home, or cousins back in Ireland. So they want that information about Patrick's life to carry over and for his family to know what happened to him. So those types of incidences were often covered by the newspapers heavily in the place of origin, right? They're also just high interest activities, right? If there's a big mining accident somewhere in the world, it's going to be covered by international newspapers, generally speaking. Obviously, the American West is a heavy area for mining as well. And that leads us to another question that was asked yesterday. I think it was posted. Guy Lee, who I saw in the comments. So Guy, we're getting to your question now. So thanks for being with us. He says, and this is a bit of a long story, but that's okay. Guy said his great-grandfather, Robert Baldwin, immigrated from Lancashire to the US in 1906. He landed in Boston in April, remember that, along with a relative, Jacob or Job. Their planned destination was Hannah, Wyoming. Robert's wife and children, including Guy's grandfather, had remained in Lancashire until he'd established himself. But in July of 1906, so just a couple of months later, Jacob returns to the UK with the news that Robert had died. The family remains in the UK, and eventually his great-grandmother remarries. So how do we find a Robert Baldwin who arrives in April in Boston and is theoretically on his way to the coal mines in Wyoming and dies within a couple of months? Guy says he doesn't even know whether he reached Wyoming or died on the way across the country, right? What I thought was interesting about this comment, actually, Guy, was that then someone else in your family, possibly your sister, commented again on the thread and said, well, Mom said he died in a mining accident in Wyoming. Right. So that's great. I love that the family is all connecting on Facebook. My family does that too. It's really cool. And your comment back was that, well, we don't really know if that's true. I'd rather start broad and find out if that's true rather than starting with this little oral story. And I would actually advise that you do the exact opposite. I would, because you're not sure, start with the oral history that you have. Although oral histories are often convoluted and confusing and exaggerated, there's almost always some little nugget of truth in those stories. We also have the fact that they intended their destination, they documented their destination as Hannah, Wyoming. Now, I happen to know this because I live in the area and I study mining, but so it's not really common knowledge. But if you put those two things together, Hannah is actually the site of one of the largest mining disasters in the United States. They had an accident in one of their mines in 1903, and it killed a couple hundred people. And in fact, there were so many fatalities from this accident that they had to actually create a new cemetery. The cemetery in the town could not handle this influx of bodies. Now, again, that's not common knowledge necessarily, but because you have someone who has indicated a destination of Hannah, and if you look on the passenger list, it happens to show that not only did they indicate their destination as Hannah, but they also had people that they were going to see in Hannah, right? They knew people there. You can actually assume that they may have made it to Hannah. And one of the reasons I say that is because the coal mine in Hannah was one of the primary sources of coal for the Union Pacific Railroad. So Union Pacific had a direct line into Wyoming, and it was a busy one at that time. So they would have, in theory, been able to get off the boat, get on a train, and be in Wyoming within probably a week. So there's no reason to assume that he didn't die in a mining accident in Wyoming. There's no reason necessarily to say for sure that he did, but you can find those hints on the passenger list. So let me once again pull my screen up. Let me make sure this is the right one. Oh, nope, see, that is the wrong record. Let me do that. And try this again. So in the Boston passenger lists, right, which are available on Findmypast, you see the family of interest here. Let me scroll over. So here they are, Jacob and Robert Baldwin. And I'm sure that this is where most of your information is coming from, right? We know their ages. They're 48 and 30 years old. We know they're coal miners. You can see that here. Let me zoom in just a little bit so you guys can hopefully see that a little bit better, right? So here's Jacob, here's Robert, the coal miners. Jacob cannot read or write, but Robert can, okay? They're coming from England. We keep scrolling. Look at this here. We know they're going to Hannah, Wyoming. That's their intended destination. But the part that's important here is actually, if you keep scrolling over, they have people in Hannah, Wyoming. They have a friend in Hannah. Possibly, this is the line above, a brother-in-law, but they know somebody in Hannah. And there's an indication here of a last name. I think it's a last name. It kind of looks like it's penciled in as Thomas Raleigh. So because you have that clue, that's really an important one. I would start researching this Thomas Raleigh. This is part of your friends, associates, and neighbors research plan. So make sure that you are looking at material for Thomas. Is there any indication in Thomas's life that your relatives actually did make it to Wyoming? Now, once you're in Wyoming, you can also look at a number of other resources. Wyoming happens to be one of those states where resources around mining incidents is actually pretty good, pretty well covered. So let me give you a couple of suggestions. First, there's the Wyoming Newspapers website, which is wyomingnewspapers.org. It's an independent site. It's run by probably the state library. I didn't actually check, but it is a free website. So take advantage of that. There are a number of resources at the Wyoming State Archives, including the state mine inspector reports, which may mention any kinds of accidents that happened in the spring of 1906. Almost every death of a coal miner is included in those annual reports. So it includes things like their name, their place of death, the details surrounding the death itself, and often a brief biographical sketch. And again, those are available through the Wyoming State Library, but you can also find them on sites like Internet Archive and Google Books. You're going to want to look at the county clerk records. So look at whatever county Hannah, Wyoming is located in and see if you can find anything there. There's also, and I know I'm listing off an awful lot, but this is recorded, so you can come back and watch it again. The Rocky Mountain Online Archive is a wonderful site that builds together all the card catalogs for a number of different states: New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and I want to say Arizona. It might just be those first three. Anyway, card catalogs for every major institution is included in the Rocky Mountain Online Archive. So you want to take a look at their materials and see if you can find anything related to accidents or deaths in Wyoming in 1906. The Denver Public Library Genealogy and Western History Division is one of the best genealogy collections this side of the Mississippi River. You also have a branch of the National Archives in Denver. There's a lot of opportunities here. And then the Colorado School of Mines actually has a really extensive archive as well. So what you're looking at is a really regional approach, right? The United States is a big place, and you're looking at essentially a very small time frame, a very small event. It's only a couple of months of 1906, and the records could be in any one of those locations. Remember that we were territories before we were states, and county borderlines changed a lot. So over the course of history, those records may have floated around, or the government boundary may have changed around the records, and you may find them in a number of different locations. So whew, that was a lot, right? There's a lot available actually on our mining ancestors in the US. And a lot of people don't realize that. They kind of go, well, he disappeared off into California or Colorado gold rush, and we never heard from him again, and that's it. If this were a situation around a gold mine or a silver mine or any other mineral outside of coal, I would say you need to also look at land and property records, because staking a claim on a gold mining site, gold rush claim, was essentially buying a piece of property, right? But this is a coal mining situation where it's more like an employee to employers. If you're in any other mineral in the United States, you really want to look at land and property and newspapers, because they had to list the purchase of that property publicly, and that always took place in newspapers. And Guy Lee says, phew. Yeah, I know that was a lot to kind of point at you, but generally speaking, there's a lot of material available for this category of research. We just have to look around, because it's not most of it's not digitized yet. That's really the key, is you have to find out which archive it's sitting in, which manuscript collection, so that you know the right person to ask. Oh, and thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew, for this. Hannah is in Carbon County in Wyoming. I didn't have a chance to look it up this morning. And that's a really appropriately named county for a discussion around mining. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and it was your sister that commented, Guy. Thank you for that. All right. So that's my mining tangent for the day. I will get off that tangent now, although it's one of my favorite topics. Okay. So let me just clarify this really quick. Jackie commented that the 1950 census is due to be released in April of 2022. That's true. And all websites, including Findmypast, will have it as a public document. Not necessarily true. And I didn't mean to imply that. So I will give my correction. I can't speak for any other website out there. All that I know for sure, we know is fact, is that the 1950 census is public domain material, and anybody can request it. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to publish it. So I don't want to be unclear about that. I obviously don't know the plans for any other website, and I only represent Findmypast. So just to be very clear, and I'm not even saying anything about Findmypast's strategy or plan at this time. We're just saying that we could request it because it's public domain. In fact, Jackie, you could request it if you wanted it. Okay, so there was one more question that was asked in advance that I kind of want to get to, because it's a really good example of what catches a lot of people when they're starting research in the United States. Linda said on one of our Facebook posts, I think my elusive grandfather may have immigrated to the United States around 1930. Can you help? Well, the answer to that, Linda, is maybe. Probably, but maybe. So it really depends on a lot of different variables. And as we've talked about already today, there is no national register. There's no national collection that we can refer to. There are a couple of sources, though, that you want to make sure that you look at first. The first would be the collection called the Passenger List Leaving the UK, which is available on Findmypast. And I'm going to ask Niall to share that link, and I know he will. And the reason I start with this is because by the 1930s, the passengers moving in and out, the immigration process around the world was much more thoroughly documented than really at any point in previous history, right? By the time we get to about the 1900s, the availability of passenger lists really explodes. Anything before that is not quite as well documented. So that passenger list leaving the UK set should give you a really good idea as to whether or not he actually got on the boat and where he was headed, right? Leaving for the US in this sense might have actually meant Canada, right? Transportation tickets to Canada were a lot cheaper than it was into Boston or New York or New Orleans or any of the other major ports along kind of the United States eastern seaboard. So do not rule out the opportunity that he may have actually gone into Canada. You can also look at the British and Irish Roots collection on Findmypast. Now, the benefit of this collection is that it allows you to search a number of different passenger and immigration-related documents at one time. So instead of searching all the census records and all the passenger lists and naturalization records kind of one by one, you put a name into British and Irish Roots and you can filter it down to the period in which you're interested in, and it searches all of those records for you. And then when you click on the results, it leads you to a specific data set or a specific collection. I would also make sure that you analyze the 1940 census very carefully. If he traveled during the 1930s, he should be on the 1940 census if he's in the United States. Because you didn't indicate a location in anything more specifically, and you didn't offer his name, I can't really speak to the ease of searching the 1940 census, right? I mean, if he ends up in Alaska and his last name is, something very unique, you're going to find him pretty quickly. If he's in the middle of Boston and his last name is Smith, it's going to be a bit of a struggle because the population by that time is just so big. So I will give you a tip. And this one is not an easy one to duplicate because it's not online. But for each of the United States censuses, there is a full published index. And the benefit of that index is that it allows you to go in on the 1940 census and look at all the Smiths in the state of North Carolina and put them all side by side, no matter where they are in the state. Almost all online sources organize the census by location, and the index is organized by last name. So you can see all the Smiths next to each other. So you can start through that process of elimination, right? Unfortunately, again, these are not available online. They're still protected by copyright. So you can find them at major institutes, the Library of Congress and National Archives, for example, the Family History Library. I don't know if any facilities in the UK have them. I would assume that the National Archives probably does, maybe the British Library. But Family Search has this wonderful new service. Well, they'll do a lookup for you on a particular record set. So find that service provided by Family Search. The indexes are available at the Family History Library. They can go in, make some, grab some scans for you and send it out to you by email. It's probably the easiest way to get to them today in our current situation and environment, assuming you can't travel to an archive. So what you're looking for, again, is the surname index or the name index of the United States Census. It's published, not online, because it really helps you pinpoint that needle in a haystack scenario. So that's one of my best tips. It's a fantastic resource. It's something everybody should be using. And unfortunately, it gets ignored a lot. I would love to actually just have a full copy of it, to be honest. If I could find it on eBay, I would totally buy it. Okay. All right, so that, I think that, yeah, so back to Linda's question, right? Somebody arrives in the 1930, where do I go? Passenger list leaving the UK, British and Irish roots, and the 1940 census are your three main starting points on that question, Linda. Okay, Beth has a good question. Looking for a divorce in probably Canada, though might be in the US. Do I look by state and or county level? And the answer, Beth, is yes. You want to look at both. Every state is different, and in Canada, every province is different. And depending on the time frame we're talking about, there may or may not be records of this situation. So you want to look at county records in the US, and again, in Canada as well. Try and refine your location, obviously. But counties, the county is where I would start. I would also look at the Family Search Wiki for that particular area to see if they mention anything about availability of divorce records. In the county, you want to look with the county clerk or the recorder's office. It's the same place where records like land deeds would be kept. they're most likely to have those kinds of registers. So if you don't find them at the county level, you can look at the state level. Some states are better than others. So for example, Illinois and Missouri both have really, really wonderful state databases and an online presence, state websites that help you identify and find the particular records that they have available to them. You might also find them in state or province level libraries and library collections. So you're going to kind of broaden your search a little bit, but absolutely for those divorce records, you're looking at a state or county level. Both. The answer is both. Okay. Okay, so this is a good one. Got about 10 minutes left, so we'll see how much of this we can get through, guys. Anne asked, my grandfather disappeared in Pennsylvania in 1925, and after many research, I'm assuming many years or many months, the last info of him was from his sister in 1935. I can find no death for him and believe he might have got a ship to Canada. Okay, so a couple of things to remember. Obviously, we've talked about this pretty thoroughly now today. There is no kind of state or national database for this kind of event. Did he get on a ship to Canada? Well, you might be able to find that. There are records for border crossings, and most of them are referred to as the Vermont border crossings, but don't let the name of the state in that title fool you. It is, they do include records from outside of Vermont. So no matter how he crossed the border, you want to look at those Canadian-US border crossings. Those are available on Findmypast. So that would be one place that you could absolutely check. The other thing you want to look at is newspapers. In Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, pretty much any of the New England states, and any state where there was a large influx of immigrants in this time period, there was always the chance that someone listed something in a paper. So they actually put wanted ads in the newspaper saying, I'm looking for John Smith. He was last seen in Philadelphia in 1923, might have been headed for Canada. His sister is seeking information. And they would actually write into the newspapers and respond to these queries if they had information. So look at newspapers. There's a couple of data sets on Findmypast that actually pull these notices out. But I think the one that we have is for Boston. So I'm not sure that it would cover someone through Pennsylvania. I don't think it would. It's really pretty focused on the Boston area, but it's worth a shot. If you think that he went into Canada, and if you have any idea of the province, and I would say probably Ontario is the most likely, you can look at the Ontario Genealogical Society as well. They have a wonderful index on their website called the Ontario Name Index, and there's another one, Ontario Genealogical Society Provincial Index, OGSPI, pretty sure I got that right. Both of those are available on the Ontario Genealogical Society website. I think you have to be a member to access them, but it might be worth the membership fee if you think Ontario is a destination. They record all the birth, marriage, and deaths that they can find evidence of across the province from all time frames, all periods, all everything. So look, I would say Ontario is likely just because of the geography and the migration movements back and forth across the border. But obviously he could be, could be just about anywhere, really. In terms of a death, you're going to look at all of the main websites, right, and all the main genealogical tools, and put some requests out there, right? Join the Facebook group, join the local society where you think he might have ended up or where you last know him to be, and start asking questions, right? Those that collaborative effort, the community effort is especially important in the United States, because there's going to be someone out there in some little tiny town that knows, oh, my county courthouse has this record and I can go look that up for you. It's not online, and their website's hard to navigate, but I am 5 minutes away and I can go find it for you. So take advantage absolutely of that network of researchers that exists across the United States, and Facebook and all the other platforms. Okay, let me go through. We have about 6 minutes left. This looks like an interesting question. Linda says, Would the British Army have been on US Census records or show on entry records? Great-granddad left pregnant great-grandma in the UK and went to Jamaica. She followed him in 1899 alone after losing the baby. Oh, that's sad. Okay. Would the British Army have been on any US Census records or show on entry records? Linda, I can't think of any reason why the British Army would be entering the United States in the mid to late 1800s. If he traveled with the army, no, I can't think of anything. And the US Census would not have recorded him because he wasn't a real resident of the United States, wasn't actually here permanently. And Jamaica is not necessarily covered in all of the US federal censuses either, because it wasn't always a US territory or US affiliated location. So US Census is probably out. I would actually probably go back to his British Army records and see if you can pinpoint more specific locations and details from that collection. There's really not going to be any record in the US that I can think of that would record British Army activities. The only exception to that might be on the National Archives website in their card catalog. They do have records from like the State Department that indicates activities of foreign like ambassadors, consulates, military interactions back and forth between the countries. But that's going to be at a very kind of high organizational level. I don't think I've ever seen anything in there that is on an individual soldier level. So unless he had some kind of high rank, I wouldn't imagine you would find him in there. And none of those are indexed by name, to my knowledge. It would be kind of going through image by image and reading a whole lot of material. I'm trying to think. Entry records? No, not really. I can't think of any example where the British Army was recorded in passenger lists arriving in the United States. And again, I can't think of any reason why they would even come as an entity. If he came as an individual, that's different, obviously, but nothing affiliated with the British Army. So unfortunately, we can't help with that one too much. Okay. Oh, she followed up and said he deserted. Oh, okay. So he deserted the British Army and arrives in the US is the theory. It kind of sounds like now. Yeah, so then he would have been considered an individual passenger. And in that case, yeah, you might find him on passenger lists and all the other resources that we've talked about today. So look at passenger lists leaving the UK, look at just the British and Irish Roots collection, and all the other standard kind of passenger arrival list places. Again, look at Canada. If he deserted, it might have been easier for him to get to Canada and certainly cheaper at that point to get a ticket into Canada versus the United States. Okay, so hopefully that helps, Linda. And I would still go back and look at his British Army records and just really reanalyze with that lens on of where did he go from here, right? Was there anything in there that, it's always a good idea to go back and reassess and reevaluate your sources and look at them with that different question in mind, right? Based on your research goal. Okay, I think we have time for one more. I'm gonna try and sneak this in. Lynn asked her great-great-grandfather and family in Indian Territory in Oklahoma with the US Army at the time of the 1860 census. Does a federal census for Indian Territory in 1860 exist? Yes, yes it does. It would be part of any major site's census collection. So instead of, and it's probably labeled as a state in modern times for ease of publication on the various genealogy websites. So Findmypast should have it. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't, although I've never specifically looked for Oklahoma Territory in the 1860 census on Findmypast, although I'm sure we do. Yeah, it should be there. And U.S. Army at the time of the 1860 census in Indian Territory was obviously an area of heavy activity. You're talking about a time when, essentially people are trying to extinguish, is that the right word, the native population. And there's a lot of territory disputes, and you're right at the cusp of the American Civil War. So Oklahoma and other territories on the western edge of what was then the United States is heavily debated, heavily sought after, controversial territory, right? Are they going to go with the North or the South? Are they going to be for the Union or the Confederacy? So the Army was actually quite active in those areas, and you'll find a great deal of information. So I would start actually by looking at the census and then start learning about the activities of the U.S. Army in Oklahoma Territory or in Indian Territory at that time. Some of the resources I mentioned earlier, like the Denver Public Library Genealogy and Western History Division, is going to be very helpful towards that because they study kind of the West as a whole. You also should be able to find some materials on the National Archive website and National Archives Denver, specifically the Denver branch. Okay, so I think that's all we have time for today. This has been a good discussion, lots of really good questions, stretching across a lot of different periods of history, which is always fun. So I hope that that's been helpful. And I would love to know, actually, if you guys want to do US or North American records like Q&A like this more consistently. So if you have opinions about North American research, let me know. Leave comments in the thread or send it across to us via email. I would love to hear from you and what you would like to hear from Find My Past in terms of North America. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we will see you on Friday, as always, for Find My Past Friday with brand new records every single week at Find My Past. So thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.